let's talk a little bit about your book.
Oh, please do.
I loved your book.
I've actually got it in front of me.
There you go.
If no one's seen it, this is it. Go to the store, go to Amazon and buy it. So,
all right.
Fun project, obviously.
Right. And so did that come about? Were you ever thinking about writing a book before you rode to the airport with Nick Faldo?
No, actually not. It's an interesting series of events because I would tell story. The story that I tell in relation to maybe I ought to write a book was I used to play in the Hugh Wilson, which was at Marion. It was their individual tournament. It started as a two-man tournament and then went to individual. And I used to play there. One day I was playing a practice round with a couple of guys from Shoal Creek before the event. And the caddy that I had, told one of the other guys that I knew Hogan. And so that's kind of back then it was kind of like my worst nightmare because now it never ends, the right. Start and it goes from there. And so as we're walking off the first tee after we hit our tee shots, this guy says to me, he says, I understand you know Hogan. And, of course I said yes. And we started a conversation. He said, I got a Hogan story to tell you. Well, you can't imagine the number of people that I run into that have Hogan stories that they want to tell me. The minute they say to me, Hogan, I know what's coming next, and that is you want to tell me a Hogan story that you heard.
All right, absolutely.
It always ends up there, So I listened to the guy's story, and we're walking up to our second shot, and it's a story that originated with me, and I was just shocked that someone had repeated it to him all the way wherever, on the East Coast or whatever.
Right. This is before social media. This is word of mouth.
Oh, this is absolutely word of mouth.
Right.
So what happened was he had a couple of the facts of the story that weren't correct. And so I said, I said that really is a story that only could have originated from me. I said, that's interesting, but these things are wrong with your story. And he goes like, no, that's not the way this happened. And I went, okay. and he goes, yeah, it's funnier the way I tell it. And so I went like, okay, there's probably a reason for me to correct this. And that was kind of one of those small steps in the genesis of the book. I better write this down. And so somewhere around that timeline, I started writing stories down and just kind of filling paper with stories that I originated. The genesis of the book really was that I wanted people to know who Hogan was, and it was impossible to do that unless you were in a position like mine or a few other people, because the real answer was that he had very, very definite concepts of compartmentalizing who he was. He really had three lives, and they did not cross into each other. He had a golfing life, he had a business life, and then he had a social private life. And what happened in that context of those lives is that if you knew him in one of those areas, you would not know him, and he wouldn't share conversations in other areas. So it was really interesting from my perspective, because I was kind of like the fly on the wall. I was around him enough in different situations that I really got to see glimpses of everything. I mean, I was really close to the Hogan people in the Hogan company. I was obviously around him on his golf. And then I was around him socially because of the dynamic of being at Shady Oaks and also then being at Colonial after that in different social environments there. So really got a perspective. I guess the guy that gave me an awareness of it all was Ron. Do you know Ron Syrak, the writer with Golf Digest?
I know the name, and I've seen him a YouTube or two of his.
Oh yeah, terrific person. Ron put it to me the best of anybody. He goes, the problem with Hogan is that if you wanted to know something about Nicholas or Palmer or pick an athlete, you just pop in an ESPN tape and you know everything about them. And Hogan was pre-ESPN. So there's no way that you would be able to know anything about him unless you are directly conversing with someone like myself who had the experience personally for him. And that's really what I wanted to do in the afternoons with Mr. Hogan. I wanted to take stories that not regurgitated, the stories that were personal stories that I had experienced, and just pass those on so that someone who didn't know him would understand who he really was. So that's really how the book became.
But then Nick got you started though, right?
Oh yeah. No, that conversation, I was taking Nick and John Simpson, who was the ING agent of his. I was taking him back to the airport after the meeting with Hogan that day. And so Nick did turn over to me and he did say, with all that you know about what he's done and who he is, why don't you write a book about it? And then Simpson in the back said, yeah, and you should start with the context of it being at your youth and then just expand it from there. And so, I went like, that's probably makes sense because, I mean, when I leave the ground, there, all these stories are gonna die and go away. And
right. No, you have a responsibility, huh?
Well, I don't know that I saw it that way. It was just, wow. It has done a couple of things. It has shortened my conversations about Hogan because I'll tell somebody, hey, go buy the book and then let's talk after that. So it takes care of that side of it. So yeah, it's been a good personal tool for me, in addition to being just a fun project overall.
That's great. Now, so I always had the impression, having missed a sentence after having read the book the first time, that you just shagged for him for years and years, but you just shagged for him for 4 years, right? Ish.
Yeah, I started shagging for him in '64, in the summer of '64.
So here's a question before you go there, before I forget. So they filmed Shell's Wonderful World of Golf in 1964, and then they showed it in 1965. So were you involved with Mr. Hogan at that time?
Yeah, I was around during those periods. See, what he had done at that point competitively is he played in 5 or 6 events, and that was the extent of it. Because he really had interest in his business, and he didn't like traveling. And so he just kept it in that world. Well, what that meant was that he was going to be at Shady Oaks hitting balls every day. And so I was going to be out there with him for 2.5, 3 hours a day, while he was doing that. And so that was kind of the reason that I spent so much time around him, is because he was there. And that was just kind of his style of testing clubs and just keeping, he loved to hit balls, obviously. So he just kept it in that world. And so that gave me a platform for knowing him better. But it was really fortunate for me because I caught him right at the end of his career. He was seriously competitive, as with the Snead deal and with the U.S. Opens that he played in, and all the other events, the scores he shot, at Augusta right at the end. Right. I mean, because at that point he was 51 or 52 at that stage. And then the last event he played in was in '70, I think at Colonial. And so that was kind of the end of it. So, and I ended up leaving Shady Oaks latter part of '69, but I was fortunate enough that I'd created so many good relationships, like with the Hogan Company people, and really in a kind of a social environment, that I stayed in contact with him really all the way through up until his death. So there was a lot of access that he and Valerie allowed me during those periods. So it was just fun to be involved and to have that relationship.
Sure. Yeah. And it's interesting to have that. So the 4 years you spent shagging balls for him, and then that evolved to a lifetime experience.
Yeah, I mean, I get asked this from time to time, and it really has a strong foundation in the relationship I had with him. But I mean, he was, I wouldn't call him a mentor because we really never had that kind of a relationship. I know he had that kind of a relationship with like Chris Cheddar and her brother, but I was in a totally different, social world at that time. I mean, I was a poor Mexican kid just working in the bag room essentially. But I mean, I could talk to him and I could ask him questions, or he would say something, I'd remark. And I felt like he was a friend in this context that, he never talked down to me. He never dismissed what I'd asked him or what we were discussing. And so it was a very comfortable, conversation. I was very comfortable if someone wanted later on in life, if someone wanted to meet him, to call him and say, hey, can I bring this guy over? He'd like to visit for just a couple of minutes. And he was very cordial and respectful in those regards. So it was a good foundation for me in terms of that relationship again. Let me close the door to this office area. Just sorry, Vicky's got some guys over working on the house, so they're tearing stuff up. Hopefully not too bad, but
exactly. Okay, here we go. So did you play some junior golf? So Gary Lumpkin, bless his heart, got you that job at Shady Oaks, and where would we be if he didn't get that job?
There's no telling. There's a lot. One of my favorite sayings is, I don't want to back up 1 minute because I don't know what that minute would really mean. So yeah, if Gary hadn't leaned over in that geometry class and said, hey, what are you doing this summer? Then I probably, the book wouldn't be written, and I'd never gone to Shady Oaks and all that followed with that. So yeah, it was a funny story from there.
So you say you're on the golf team. What kind of a golf team did you guys have?
Zero. It was a very, very poor environment from just a middle income, lower income area. So nobody played golf. And the only reason I played golf was that I'd hurt my knee playing football. And my dad asked the doctor if it'd be okay if I could play golf. And he said, yeah, just no contact sports. And so my dad and uncle had a bunch of clubs just randomly, they threw in a bag and I started playing. And that was kind of the genesis of me getting into the game. But yeah, if that had to happen and Gary doesn't lean over, I'm not at Shady Oaks. And there's a world of stories that would never have followed from there. So, and the timing of Shady Oaks itself is pretty interesting because Marvin Leonard, who had built Colonial, went over and to that area and built Shady Oaks. And of course, he sold Colonial to the membership before he did that. And to be a member of Shady Oaks, you literally just asked him if you could be. And there were only about 100 members during that cycle. He eventually sold the club to the membership at Shady Oaks in 70 or 71. And at that point, but prior to that, they were just a group of friends, which was very comfortable for Hogan and, what he was doing. And, Leonard was his best friend. So it was perfect relationship for all involved. But there was no initiation fee back then. You just went into Marvin Leonard and said, hey, I'd like to join Shady Oaks. And he didn't say yes or no. And then you start paying dues and there you go. So there were there were only three of us in the golf shop back then. The head pro was Art Hall, and then Tom Sisolak was the assistant. And then I was the guy that did everything else. I did the range, took care of the bag rooms, swept the floors, worked behind the counter. So it was kind of a job with many, many titles tied to it, and not very much money in addition to that. So that's another part of that conversation. So yeah, good experiences all the way around.
I have a Hogan story for you. I have a couple actually.
Go ahead.
So I had your job when I was at Candlewood Country Club in Southern California. So I picked up the range. And so in those days, what we did, I'm sure like you, is we would pick the balls up with our tubes and put them into canvas bags. That's the way we picked up the whole range, with tubes.
Right.
Right. And so we had a guy named Richard Martinez. And Richard, in those days, we had 3-wheel carts. This is before 4-wheel carts. And he would pick the range with a tube in his right hand and a tube in his left hand, and be driving down the range just picking it like this. Very talented fellow. And he ended up getting his tour card. And he also had the opportunity to watch Mr. Hogan hit golf balls at Shady Oaks, I believe. And, we hear all the Hogan stories about how good he was. And he said, okay, I'm going to take the stories I've heard with a grain of salt. I know when he watched him, he was 60 something years old. So he wasn't at his peak, obviously. So he says, I'm going to take those stories with a grain of salt. And he said, Greg, those stories don't do him justice. He hit balls through the same hole in the sky over and over and over.
That was what he practiced more than anything else. Yeah. And a similar experience. Jim McLean and I got to know each other pretty well back when his kid was going to school at TCU in Fort Worth, and he would come in and we'd visit about Hogan. And one of the funniest parts that I'd always comment to him, I would always say, Jim, I said, you've done a lot of video on Hogan. I said, but it's better in person. And we used to laugh about that.
So did Jim ever get a chance to see him?
No. No. Hogan was, and this story, part of the story is really true. Hogan did not allow anybody to be around him while he practiced. It was me or whoever shagging balls and him hitting balls. And no, you didn't just go out in the areas he practiced, where he practiced at Shady Oaks were, kind of away from the clubhouse. So it wasn't really like walk over and, watch him hit. It was not secluded, but far enough away that but he didn't want any distractions. And so there were two primary areas that he practiced in, and everybody knew to stay away. Nobody just drove up and started chit and chat with him or anything like that. Now, I've seen people do that, and he's not dismissive over it, but it's not comfortable. There are other settings. It's like you're walking into his office and
right.
Going to have a nice social chit chat. He really wasn't interested. He was there to do what he was going to do, and he just didn't want the distraction of it. Like we really didn't talk that much while he was practicing. Conversations I had with him were typically when we were driving out there, or when we came back, or when he was chipping, or I'd sit behind the hole while he was putting, and we'd chat back and forth then. But while he was on the range hitting balls, it was business. There was no comedy or distractions taking place.
He had a joke or two though, didn't he? Once in a while.
Oh yeah, the humorous side of him you would not know if you were outside the ropes following him, you saw the competitive person there.
Right.
But in a social setting, or just kind of messing around, casually, he enjoyed, people just as much as anybody.
Right.
that and Lee Trevino is a good friend, and Lee does a good job of this too. And Lee's comment is that I really only need a handful of friends, and the rest of the people I know, but I really just need a handful of friends, and that's the context that Hogan kept himself in. He didn't have thousands of friends. He had a select group of people that he always interacted with. And then, he knew other people, but he focused his, energies on the people that were in that, group of close friends. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Oh, no, of course not. You mentioned at one time that Royal was a good player and he played in the gang every once in a while. So did he play competitive golf?
No. He played in like the city tournaments. He had an office supply company, and so he
in Fort Worth, huh?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and, very cool.
Yeah, no, he had an office supply company, and he did business with all the guys that were there at Shady Oaks and everything. It was a successful company, and he was an excellent player. He was probably a 2-3 handicapper, but he really never played, outside of just some minor, events and member guest deals. He really didn't, strive to do that. And I don't know why. I mean, he could have competed in, let's say, Texas Golf Association state events or regionals, but nah, just didn't do it.
So the 4 years that you spent, and then the reason that seems the way I remember reading it, that when you left Shady Oaks, you went to Arlington, Texas to go to college?
Yeah, I'd actually, from a personal educational perspective, I actually went 1 year to Texas A&M and was at A&M and played my freshman year there. I'm not an Aggie. I don't do maroon and white. But that was the year. That was the last year that A&M was all male, and I didn't know anything. I mean, I'm a poor Mexican kid. Don't have a clue what I'm doing, and went down and Henry Ransom was the golf coach back then. He was an old 40s and 50s golf pro out of Bryan. He was, so I went down and visited with him, and a guy named L.F. Peterson, who was the chairman of the board of Texas A&M, was a Shady Oaks member. And so he asked me one day what I was going to do about going to school. And I told him I was trying to figure out how to go to college. And so he said, well, why don't I call Henry Ransom, see if you could play golf at Texas A&M on a scholarship. And of course, I said, heck yeah, if I can do that, that'd be great. So I went down and met with Ransom and ended up playing on the team. And but I told Ransom, I go like, this is not what I thought college was. I wasn't prepared for an all-male military environment. So I left after that 1 year there, went back over to Shady Oaks again, and then ended up going over to Shady Valley Country Club in Arlington and working there. So I finished out a year of college. So that's kind of how I ended up in leaving Shady Oaks and moving on from there.
So let's can we talk about a couple of the chapters here? You talked about practice as an art form, and you talked about how so many golf instructors have lamented, the word you used, that they didn't get a chance to see him hit golf balls. And that's one of my greatest regrets, is I never really had a chance to see him hit golf balls or hear him, which would have been so much fun.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway would be watching the golf ball, because I get people that show me a video or show me a picture, of a position he's in, something like that.
Absolutely.
And they go like, well, see, he does that. And I would go like, well, did you see the ball? And they go, no, it's a picture. And I go, well, if you didn't see the ball, you have no clue what he was trying to do. I mean, this is a guy that hit a shot. He didn't just hit a golf ball, he hit a shot. And so if the elements and the situation presented itself to where it was either a low cut, low hook, high cut, high hook, I mean, there's just tons of ways that he made the ball move. And unless you saw the ball, I mean, you couldn't just assume, okay, that's what he does every day. I always kind of giggle. Everybody says, well, he cuts the ball all the time. And I go like, nah, apparently you never talked to the man. No, he didn't. His focus, well, let's just start a tee shot. Let's just play a hole. His focus was he'd stand on the tee and he'd look at the trouble. Let's say that there's water left, and he would set up to hit the ball toward the water and cut it away from the water. Let's say there's a bunker right in the fairway. He would aim at the bunker and move it left. And now you go like, well, why would you do that? And he goes, because I know where the ball's going. And I'm going to move the ball away from the trouble. Why would I hit the ball away from the trouble and take the chance that it'll go to the trouble? So he played that conversation, from the tee box, and essentially the same thing when he got to the second shot. He was that hit through windows in the sky, the trajectory. He knew trajectory controlled distance. So if you had the proper trajectory of a ball, you knew it was going 130 or 140 or 145, whatever that number happened to be. And then he added to that the concept of how you attacked the pin location. Because if the green was, if the pin was to the front of the green, he always said, okay, hit a full shot. If you're confused, just hit a full shot. And that way, if you hit it a little further than you think, you're in the middle of the green. If you got the pin to the back of the green, he said, just hit a 3/4 shot. That way you won't get the ball past the hole and accidentally hit it over the green. So there were concepts like that he really built into how he approached playing the game that really have a lot of relevance now. I know one thing that it was kind of comical about Faldo's meeting is that Faldo asked him, he said, what's the most important club in the bag? And Hogan said, the driver. And Faldo said, why? And he said, well, you have to position your tee shot in order to be able to attack the pin. And if you can't do that, then someone's going to beat you. And that's true. And it was so funny because Faldo said to him, I don't think so. And I just kind of get privately and go like, okay, this is going to be kind of interesting because he won't debate you. He'll just say, okay, if that's the way you feel, go on. So, Faldo said, yeah, the guys hit it so far now that it doesn't matter if they hit it in the right position. And Hogan just kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, okay. And then I heard Faldo on a telecast, oh gosh, several years later, and just off the cuff, he was talking about the most important club in the bag, and he said, it's the driver.
Driver. There you go.
That's a full circle.
Yeah. It took a while to sink in, but it sunk in, apparently.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, try to play a U.S. Open not caring where you hit it. It's kind of hard to do. So he did.
I thought it was really interesting when he said, hello, Jody, isn't this a wonderful morning? That's the first time he mentioned your name.
Oh, yeah.
Must have been great.
Oh, yeah. It's so funny. Just the process of shagging for him was kind of weird. It was kind of like Gary Lunkin reaching over and saying, hey, what are you doing this summer? Because I was in the bag room and the caddies really didn't want to go out with him because they could make more money, for caddying or caddying with the gangster that goes out. And so it was a struggle to get somebody to go out with him, and we'd call around. So finally Art Hall just said, why don't you just go just shag for him, and then you can pick up the rest of what you're doing when the gangster finishes, because he would finish about the time they did. And so that's what I did. And so first couple of times I sat there, I didn't introduce myself formally. I was just another kid, grabbing balls. And so when he sat down and he said something, so, he didn't ask me what my name was. So he must have asked somebody else. And that just kind of started the conversation. And it was kind of funny because when we got back, I was taking his bag in, set it in the locker room, and Art walked behind me, and Art says, "Did you see that he knew your name?" And I went like, "Yeah." And it just told me that Art didn't tell him, somebody else had mentioned and he had asked. So again, it's just to me, just an extension of, what his personality was. And the fact that, he did care, that, somebody was there. And from there, it just kind of mushroomed into other, conversations and, with the obvious, one that I see the greatest value in is just how the story of how, he said to me, "Hey, you want to know how to hit a golf ball like I do?" And that's where the secret came through, and how that whole, hour of conversation or 45 minutes of conversation, came to be. So pretty.
The thing I thought was so interesting about that is when he handed you his 8-iron and said, "Go ahead and hit these 3 balls," and then you hit these really good shots, right, in the direction you were thinking and hoping, and were pleased with yourself. And he sits down and he says, "Well, you just hit them too far. You can't play golf like that."
Yeah, he had no clue what I was going through, because those balls could have gone anywhere. I have no earthly idea how I happened to hit those 3 balls the way they turned out. So that part of it is amazing in and of itself. But that was not the comment I was expecting when I got through. So
right. And then I wanted to ask you, so when you looked down at that club face and it was so open, what was your first impression?
I'd seen him. I'd seen the address position many times before, so it wasn't shocking. I mean, I'd cleaned it, for years, so I knew pretty well, what everything looked like. I just happened to be in a position to where there was so much to the just trying to get through that you just kind of black out.
Right.
It's just like one of my funny events was I was out on the driving range hitting balls, and I'd go out and hit some balls on the driving range when it was nothing was going on, and Art Hall was sitting there with me and watching me hit some balls, and Hogan drives up in a cart, and so he drives up on the driving range right beside where we are. And so, something like, "How's it going?" or something like that. And so Art goes like, "Yeah, Jody's hitting the ball really well. Here, Jody, hit a low cut shot for Mr. Hogan. Hit a high cut shot for Mr. Hogan. Hit a low cut, a low hook, and a high hook." And I was sitting there looking at Art going like, "Why are you doing this to me?" I go like, I don't need to stand here and hit these shots just to show him I can, because I probably can't. But luckily I got through it and moved from there. But when you were in front of him and you were starting to show or trying to hit a golf ball or something, it was pretty intimidating.
Absolutely. How did you so when you were talking about the sound of Mr. Hogan's golf shots, and then you said that you were on the Colonial Tournament Committee and helping them with the range for years, and the only person you ever heard that sounded like Mr. Hogan's was Hal Sutton.
Yeah, that was pretty eye-opening. I ran the driving range during the PGA tournament, the Colonial tournament, for about 40 years. And I'm sorry?
How many years?
Oh, for about 40.
Oh, that's all?
Yeah. Yeah, I gave it up a few years ago, but I started running the driving range down there, oh gosh, I'm say 76, 77, somewhere in that time frame, after I was a member there. And of course, I knew a lot of the people there and worked on the tournament committee during that time. But yeah, one day I was just talking to somebody and I had my back to the players. And it was one of those kind of interesting times where I heard a ball. And, these are, like I was telling Jim McLean, that there's certain things like that you remember. And Hogan's ball sounded deeper than a lot of balls. And it could be the ball or it could be something like that. But he was pretty shallow in how he released the toe of the club. So the ball tended, I think, to stay on the club just a fraction longer.
There you go.
And gave the sound a different sound. And so it was funny because I had my back to the players hitting and I heard it and I kind of just got distracted. And then I heard another swing and I turned around and I looked and it was Hal Sutton hitting balls, and I went like, that's really wild. I remember the sound of the ball, but I just never heard guys the ball coming off like that before.
And the thing that's so interesting is that here you spent 40 years on a team that had the best players in the world, and there was this one distinctive person that had that sound.
Yeah, it is. And you can walk up and down that tee, and I promise you the balls sound pretty much the same. I don't know that they sound distinctive. There's tons of talent out there. So, but again, I just remember the sound of his ball. And it was, like I said, it was a little deeper, and that might've been because of the balata. But it was just a different sound. I don't know how to explain it other than that.
Yeah, that's I agree. That's so interesting. All right. You talked about the most amazing shot you ever saw. When he backed that shot up a hill when he was going down the hill.
The slope was probably 3-4 degrees. And it was about a 40-yard shot, just a little chip shot. We were coming
a little 40-yarder, which makes so much sense. How in the world did it generate that much speed, right?
He did. His balls. Guys will ask me every now and then, when you were shagging for him, did you do like some of the guys carry a towel and just catch the ball, things like that? And I always tell them, I said, no, that wasn't my deal. I said, I'd rather see what the ball does when it lands on the ground. Because the different swing that he'd make, he'd dead arm it and you could see the ball land and release. And then he would hit a ball that's got a lot of trajectory to it. It had tons of spin. And he could hit let's say a 7-iron into a common Bermuda surface, and the ball would hit, skip, and then back up. He had that much control of the club face. And his divot patterns were very shallow. There's sometimes you could look at where he had just practiced and go like, nobody's hit here.
Is that right?
Yeah, he didn't. And he justified that by saying that the ground interferes with the club face and the ball. And so he believed that you ought to just hit the ball, compress it, but the shallowness of the divot allowed the club face to maintain better control of the ball.
So he wasn't thinking about trapping it so much against the ground.
No, he never did that. Now, he, depending on the surfaces you played, if he's a beast, it's going to happen. But, and one of the, I've talked to this with Ronnie McGraw and a couple of guys, at the Hogan Company. So how come he did so well when he went over to Scotland? And the reason was he had no bounce on his clubs. His irons had zero bounce, and he was very shallow in how he released. So the control of the ball was much easier for him in that regard. And so, again, the shot that I allude to I mean, he just hit with like a 56 degree, wedge, just hit a shot that he just clipped off the ground, and it landed on the downslope and then kicked forward and then backed up a couple inches. And I looked at the ball and I go like, okay, did I really see that? It's one of those instances. I mean, I'm sitting here with you right now and I have a mental image of the picture of that ball moving. I mean, it's there. It's so funny because Faldo went over to have lunch with him. He said, take me to that shot. And then I took him out there, and John Simpson and I stood right by where the pin was that Hogan was sitting at. And Faldo got probably 6 or 8 balls and was hitting from the same deal. And he goes like, did that one spin? Did that one spin? We're going like, no, sorry, they didn't spin. So, but it was kind of interesting because I was, I when I went back up to the cart, after he said, hey, I'm done, I go like, one of those balls backed up on the slope. And he just kind of looked at me and just nodded. He obviously smoked a cigarette, and he just kind of nodded, like, okay, that's good. And, he didn't make a big deal of it, but it was a pretty big deal to me. It got me to where I would go out and practice those shots, and I'd start pronating, the toe as hard as I could, because I know that's what he did. And I was going like, and it's so funny. I'll show people from time to time that have trouble chipping the ball. I'll say, okay, this is totally against what is taught today. I said, but just fan the club open on a like a 3-step off the green chip shot. Pick a club, I don't care what it is, but fan the toe open, make contact, and fan the toe closed. Go from 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock, that kind of deal. And I said, you'll be amazed at how solid the ball feels when you do that. Now, you'll lose confidence in it because you'll think that I can't possibly do that. But he did that. And the ball definitely comes off with a more solid feel when you do that. I don't know if you've ever tried to do that, but yeah, when you're down around a chipping green or something like that, just take a ball and just fan the club open through impact or away, and then in impact, let it go ahead and rotate and close, and the ball goes straight up the face of the club with a lot of spin on it.
And of course, is the clubs that he used, the 54 personals?
Yeah.
That's complete no bounce at all, right?
Oh, no. Usually your clubs will have bounce that relates to your head. In other words, a 9-iron has 9 degrees bounce. That kind of, he there's two concepts that he really believed in terms of the construction of a club. He had very little bounce. I never measured the bounce, so I don't know, but I would say just looking at the clubs, probably the max bounce he had was maybe like 5 degrees on his 9-iron or his short irons. But what he had was a design, we call it an undersling, where if you look at the hosel, the hosel tends to go pointing towards the heel of the club. It pushes it in. So it's because he believed that the closer you got the shaft to the center of the club, the more control you'd have over the face of the club. And so, back then, the sweet spot on the club, because of the way clubs were built, was more toward the heel than it was toward the center of the club.
Right. So, that's true today?
Well, with perimeter weighting, you kind of move just about anywhere you want. So I would say yes, but not to the degree it was, right, back in the for sure. But
I think it's more toward the heel than we think on even the more perimeter weighted clubs.
Yeah. I depending on what brand are you using, it could be. I think that's totally open to debate.
So there's the book, the Man Behind the Mystique. You've seen that? The
I've
Hogan
seen
Mystique,
it.
and then the second one, they have the second one just like as a coffee table book, The
Yeah.
Man Behind the Mystique. And they had these interesting fold-out pages. And then one with Jim is giving an analysis, McLean, it's like 4 fold-out pages on the, it's really interesting. But this fold-out page, the first fold-out page in The Man Behind the Mystique is about the room at Golf House, about the Hogan room.
Right.
And there's this little picture of a set of golf clubs that he sent to a Golf House after you win a national open or national USG event. They want you to send in a club, right? Well, apparently he sent in a set of irons and he sent in a driver. And the 1953, and they said that was the heaviest club that they'd ever measured. And it measured at G2 swing weight.
Okay. You're asking me if he played that?
Yeah, I'm asking if you ever even heard about that.
No. And I
always talked about how heavy his driver was, and in fact, one of the stories with Chris Cheddar is that he gave her to hit one of his heavy drivers, and she couldn't hit it, and he was just giggling like crazy that she had trouble hitting it.
Yeah, but you got to understand that. Okay, look at the context of the time, because I tell people that all the time. They'll go like, well, here's a club that Hogan used and all that. And I go, well, look at the context of the timeline. If he used that club after 1970, which he experimented with clubs all the time from the
Right.
company, those weren't the clubs that he put in play. Those weren't the clubs that he actually physically played in competitive rounds of golf. So he could have given her a driver that he was messing around with.
Right, it could have been extreme, right?
But yeah, you'd have to, was that after 1970 or before 1970? I don't think she knew him until probably maybe the early 80s. So that would be a totally different timeline. And I just take that with a grain of salt, because I know the clubs that he played with. I mean, I've seen them, held them, and all that. I would put, without going back and looking, I would put him in the D4, maybe D5 range.
Right.
The only thing I know that for sure he always believed in, and he said this to people, just in a golfing environment, but he always believed that the driver should be as stiff as you could possibly swing that driver, that the shaft needed to be stiff and not soft at all, because his belief was when you got under the heat that your adrenaline would make the shaft react different. And he always wanted to know that he could feel comfortable that he wouldn't go sideways with the shaft. So I know that for a fact, but I'd have a hard time thinking that club they got is really, part of what he would have actually played.
And the story goes, and you probably know this one already, that in 2018, when they had the tournament, the British Open at Carnoustie, they put in the practice rounds, they put Hogan drivers and Hogan golf balls on the tee for the kids, for the participants to try. And the longest drive hit of the couple of practice rounds that they had them there was Dustin Johnson hit at 250. And there were several people that didn't hit at 200.
Yeah, that's kind of shocking. Now they had, the Bellata ball, as you well know, went further than that. I mean, you're talking balls that go 275 pretty comfortable. And he did have multiple gears. He definitely, when he moved the ball, just played within a certain yardage. But if he really needed the ball to move, I've seen him hit a ball that, would kind of raise an eyebrow. He would definitely release it differently. And it's hard to believe today that you can go back and kind of quantify, what ball distance was, because the balls just don't match up. I mean, if you try to hit a Serlin ball with a strata block or a persimmon head, it's the weirdest looking shot.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all. So I joke with my kids, who are not kids anymore. Gosh, they're 40-year-old men.
They're still kids.
Yeah, that at Colonial on number 1, from the tees they play right now, with the Bellata ball and the persimmon club, I could hit driver 2-iron on the green. And they just kind of like, because today, with the equipment as good as it is and everything, I'm hitting a driver, a 3-wood, and a 40-yard, 50-yard wedge. So, it's age does have its place in our world, but
it does.
Yeah, his clubs were interesting to hold, interesting to put on the ground and see what he really played with. But it's just like anything else. Your equipment matches what you want the ball to do. Mine certainly does, and there'd be no reason for him. One of the funny things I always heard him tell somebody was, somebody would say, while he maybe playing or watching or something like that, did you see that swing? And he goes like, no. And they go like, why didn't you see that swing? And he'd go, I have my own set of problems.
Right.
So there's no reason to watch that guy and see what his problems are. I've got my own.
Right.
So we would be better off, if you were ever watching him while he was watching or he was playing, he never watched anybody swing the club. He would look down at their feet or look over to the side, or when the ball left, he'd look up, to see the ball. But he never stood there and just, focused on somebody swinging. At least I never saw him do that.
Right. And you said you never caddied for him.
No, never did. No, I was in the bag room. And back then, nobody had caddies. I mean, it was one of those conversations where you just showed up and they just assigned somebody to you. When he was at Colonial, there was an old black caddy that would go with him. He actually worked for the telephone company in some regard. Old folks. And whenever Hogan was going to play at Shady Oaks or he was playing at Colonial, old folks, somebody, Doxy or one of his secretaries or whatever would call old folks, and he'd show up, and go around with Hogan. So there really wasn't any reason. Now, Art Hall and I would get on the cart and follow them around, while they're playing. So, we did that. That was fun to do.
You do that once in a while or often, or
just randomly, just, hey, there's nothing going on. Let's go see, what Hogan's group is doing. So you'd drive out and go do that. So, but now that.
Sorry about that.
No, I'm good.
All right. I was going to tell you when we were talking about that shot that backed up the hill. I worked for the guy that I worked for at Candlewood. He was a good player, one of the better players in our section. And this guy hit a wedge shot that you absolutely swore that he bladed it. And it would go up there and back up. And it looked like and it was so low. And you go, oh, he missed that one. That's going to skip over the green. And it just stopped on a dime.
Yeah. That's just coming shallow. I mean, that's a shot that really a good player will have.
Right.
And just somebody that doesn't understand the game, would react the same way that you just said, that yet they would expect a totally different result. But, it's a shot, especially, in the world that we're in, hard pan, Texas environment. I mean, if you didn't have that shot, you definitely wouldn't get to beat anybody. But yeah, it's a shot that makes a lot of sense. Like I said, trajectory has everything to do with the game. I think even players today understand that. You know, they're throwing the ball higher than we've ever seen it, but they're doing it because the environment's saying to them that's how you got to play. But you know, if you go play across the pond, or you go play, you know, U.S. Open and things like that, it's a totally different approach. You can't just do that. You know, at least most people can't. Maybe the Shambo can get away with it. You know, Wingfoot was just incredible. I mean, if you've ever been on that property and then, you know, then witnessed what he did and how he approached that golf course, that's just absolutely amazing. Never, I don't think anybody would have expected that kind of result and that kind of approach.
So you played Wingfoot in a couple tournaments, the Anderson or something, right?
Oh yeah, I started playing the Anderson back in 86, 87. Incredible property. I don't care if it's the East or the West, but an incredible property, and gosh, just a ton of fun to play. I can't imagine. I don't play and never really played in many two-man events, but on that one, you needed two men.
all the way it works, right? So to tell you an interesting story about slightly off the subject, but Hogan related, because Claude Harmon was such a good friend of Mr. Hogan's.
Yes.
One of my students years ago, when he was a youngster, was going to take a lesson from Claude Harmon at Wingfoot. And when Claude walked up, this young man is hitting a hook. And so he said, and he was hitting driver. I don't know why Claude was having him hit drivers, but he was hitting driver when he got there, and he let him continue to hit driver, and he kept hitting hooks. And he said, young man, if you keep hitting that shot, I can't stay here. And so he hit another couple hooks, and Claude Harmon walked away. I can't watch that hook. It's like your story about Tiny Gooch. Right. So what did that club look like when he got through fixing it?
It was so wide open. He handed it to Tiny after he grabbed it. And he says, you are hooking this driver. He had his hands on the vise. He said, and Tiny goes like, yeah, I'm hooking it. And he just braced himself and pulled back on it. And you could just hear the hosel just kind of creak. And then, because it was a blotta, you know, or it was a persimmon head.
Right.
And then he pulled it out of the vise and he set it down and looked at it and then handed it to Tiny, and then walked out of the bag room. He says, you'll never hook that club again. Why? Tiny just standing there holding the club, looking at Hogan walking out of the room. He didn't know what to say. It was hilarious. But no, he wasn't going to hook that one. Yeah. Did you ever see him hit it? Did you ever see him try to hit it? The new driver that Hogan fixed for him? Oh no, he probably went and put it back in his stock.
Ordered another one.
Oh, that has no place.
Oh man.
Oh, I gotta. Since you brought up Claude, this is off the Hogan subject, but this is one of the funniest stories. Okay, Claude stopped working at Wingfoot and Seminole, and so he went where Butch was at Lochinvar in Houston. And there was a kid that played the University of Houston named John Slaughter, who back in, gosh, I guess this was early 90s, maybe late 80s, probably early 90s. He won everything at the collegiate level. And he wanted to get a lesson from Claude. And so he came over. Now, we used to have this big gambling game. It's Lochinvar is a Nicholas course. It's on the northeast side of Houston by the airport. It's an all men's club. And so we're sitting there and somebody says, hey, he's going to give Slaughter a lesson. And Claude used to follow us around, you know, on a cart. He was like the emeritus at the pro level. You know, it's just a home base for him. And so he goes out on the tee. Of course, you can see the tee from where we're sitting in the golf shop. And he goes out. Slaughter comes up. They say hi. He spends probably 5-6 minutes with him, you know, just standing there hitting a couple of shots. And then Claude gets up, and then he walks back into the golf shop. And Slaughter and his dad are just standing there watching him walk away, you know, just kind of shrugging their shoulders. And so he sits down, and one of the guys says to Claude, he says, "How'd the lesson go with Slaughter?" And he goes like, "Well," he said, "I told the kid," because Slaughter had a real big right hand under the club. You know, he held on, you know, he didn't hook the ball, but he could, but he held on to kind of like a Azinger type grip. So Claude said, he told him, he said, "You got to move your hand up here and put it up on top of the club." And he said he hit a couple of bad shots, and then he turned to Claude and he says, "I can't do that. We're going to have to work on something else." Claude said he stood up, put his hand there and said, "Son, I never saw a man in a green jacket with his hand right here. This lesson is over." Oh, we died laughing. He said, "I never saw a man with a green jacket on that had his hand right here. So this lesson's over." He's pretty tough.
Well, before I let you go, I've got a couple things I want to finish with, and you got to tell me about when he talked about running at the ball with his right knee.
Yeah, that was a part that, you know, I kind of questioned him about. The rest of it, I was just listening, but I questioned him about it because, you know, from my perspective, I was going, well, I've never heard anybody say that. You know, you've never shared that. And then
5 lessons, right?
Yeah. And I could understand why, having watched him hit golf balls, I could understand the concept of it. And why he felt it was so important to do that. His position, you know how players sense a position, but it's not the actual position if you look at it. And his position was that the belt buckle should face the target at impact.
Like when he was talking to Tom Sislak.
Yes. And it never did. And,
right.
And you could show him a picture, which he wouldn't look at, but it never did. And so that's what I got from the comment he made about the right leg running at the ball. You run at it as hard as you need the ball to travel, and it squares the club up for you. And you know, any good teacher today will focus on lower body action, you know, more than upper body action.
Right.
Yeah, because that's what drives the golf ball. And if you can't compress the golf ball, you're not going to be able to hit a shot. So it goes hand in hand, you know, with what he said.
Very cool. And then I was going to tell you a Hogan story. So this is you know, did you ever know a man named Bernie Coyle?
Yes. Yeah, he worked for Hogan. He was kind of like our IT manager.
Right. Did you ever hear the story about him? When Bernie first got there, apparently.
Okay.
And he's working on a computer project, and this is the computer is brand new to the company. And here's Bernie working on his brand new computer, and Hogan sticks his head in the door when he's walking home, and Bernie's staying late, and he's working on this project. And he says, "Well, how's it going in there, Bernie?" And Bernie says, "Well, it's going just swell." Have you heard this?
No.
So he says, "It's going just swell." And he says, Mr. Hogan says, "I don't like swell. It makes me think of a hippie. You're talking like a hippie." So his comeback was, he says, "It's going pretty darn good," he says. And so then Hogan kind of left. Oh, and then he said, "What do you think of that?" And he said, "Well, I think it's better than swell," Mr. Hogan said. Now, here's the best part, is that when Mr. Doyle Coyle when he left the company 15 years later. And this shows you what kind of a man I think he was. 15 years later, he goes in to say goodbye to Mr. Hogan. And Mr. Hogan says, you know what? He says, that night when I walked in and told you that I said, I kind of snuck up on you and said that swell was, I didn't appreciate the word swell. He says, I really apologize for that. I shouldn't have done that. He says, you were busy and you were thinking about what you're doing. He says, I apologize. So for 15 years, he had thought about that.
No, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Right.
One of the comments he always made, let's say that you're going to ask him to go to lunch. He would say to you, I appreciate you asking, but I can't. And he would always phrase it that way. He would always say, thank you for asking, or thank you for thinking of me, but not this time, or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, he was definitely very conscious of making sure that he respected, the conversation. So now that doesn't surprise me, that he would be like that.
Well, yeah, that doesn't surprise me either, because I think he was a man that chose his words so carefully and chose his friends so carefully, and he was very thoughtful. But not everybody appreciated that.
Well, it's easy, especially in the news environment, social environment, media environment we've got right now, to get callous.
Oh, don't you think?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Faldo said to him in their meeting. He asked, he said, how do you interact with the media? And Hogan said, I don't talk to the media. and Hogan turned to John Simpson and he said, we need to stop talking to the media. And John Simpson, being the IMG guy, goes like, oh, no, we can't do that.
They're pretty important what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now tell me about the 2000 Texas Super Open and Super Senior Open in 2014.
Say that again.
Tell me about the 2014 Super Senior Texas Open or Championship.
Championship. Yeah, that was at Shady.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I was in that group by mistake. I was supposed to be in the senior group, and I was of the age to be in the super senior.
Okay.
But I've always played in a group below my age. Like, I'm 75 right now, but I play in the 65-year-old groups normally until this last year. But yeah, that was a fun experience. Obviously, because of being at Shady, and I mean, it's not like I had to learn the golf course. I mean,
right. Did you get a chance to play Shady very often when you were a kid? Did you get a chance to play Shady?
Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool.
Like Tom Sisolak and I would go out, when nothing was going on, and we'd play, and we'd jump on a cart and run around and play. So I played a lot of golf when I was working there, just because the membership was so small. There weren't a lot of people around. So from that perspective, yeah, I did play. But yeah, that was a very, very rewarding experience, and couldn't think of winning that event at a better place than being at Shady.
And it looks like you've had a very good senior career.
I've had a lot of fun. I love competing. My game is obviously not where it was many years ago. So
when did you play your best?
Probably in the late 80s, early 90s. I played in a couple senior opens.
You played in the senior open. How many times you play?
I played twice. I played at Riviera and then at Des Moines. And and played in several other events and won some stuff here and there. So again, I love competing, and luckily I still kind of see it every now and then. And So I try to pay attention, as we all should, to health stuff, and try to maintain some level of flexibility. I always tell people that the bad part about our age is that we remember how we used to play and expect that we're going to play that way again, and that's not going to happen.
Not exactly the case.
No.
So I got a couple more questions. Now, you mentioned Lee Davis in the book.
Yeah.
Lee Davis was at SC when I was there.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and he used to call. I was there his senior. He called me Rook. How you doing, Rook? So how'd you know Davis? Lee.
Oh, we met in a golf magazine in '82 created an event around their first ranking of the top 50 golf courses in the world. And LACC was probably 10th or 15th, something like that.
Right.
I don't know how Colonial got in, but Colonial was 46th. And in that ranking, what they did is they invited all the club champions from those golf courses to go to Innisbrook and play in a tournament. And so I met Lee at that event, and we actually played. I don't know if he won it. I think I finished like second or third or something like that, but we played a couple of rounds together. And that's kind of a friendship that we struck up at that time. So yeah, I've known Lee forever, and as you know, he's quite a character.
Yes, he is.
He can sip a few cocktails.
Yes, he can.
As we both know, but I haven't seen him in a while. I feel bad about that. Probably should give him a shout.
I mean, nor have I. I haven't seen him for years. Now, here's another name. Do you know Chuck Moran? He plays a lot of senior stuff in Texas, I think.
No, I don't. I know the name, but no, I do not know. Okay. I can't recall. I may have met him, but I can't recall that I have.
He won a couple senior stuff, and not necessarily in Texas this year, but this summer he played in a couple senior things in Iowa. He's from Iowa.
Okay.
He's in Iowa. And he played in 2 or 3 senior opens. Okay.
Yeah, it's obviously very hard to get in now. Well, it's always hard.
Hard, yeah. It never gets easier, does it?
No. No, golf is a very, very hard game. I always tell my kids when they get frustrated, and they're pretty good players, I tell them, I say, well, if you want a simple game, then just go play checkers.
Right.
Yeah, this isn't a simple game.
So tell me just a little bit about Matt and Lee and Lance. What are they doing these days?
Oh, they're very responsible kids, done a great job in terms of raising families. I'm very proud of all 3 of them. One is in IT and some oil and gas. The other is in the IT world, developing programs, and he's got little companies going. Lance, the youngest, is he's gotten out of where he was chasing the tour conversation for a while, and yeah, and he's very talented. He just never, like a lot of guys, could put it together. So he's starting to try and figure out what he's going to do in his next life. But yeah, Vicki and I have 8 grandkids, so we stay busy with them, and again, I'm really proud of my 3 kids. They've never really presented any problems, knock on wood. And I think if you can see kids, they're 51, 41, and 38. So if you can take them along that line and not have any real problems with them, then you've been pretty lucky.
Well, you probably somehow or other you did a good job.
Well, I'd like to take credit for some of it, but I think it's easily shared among everybody.
Right. And then it looks like Vicki Nell Abrams Vasques has Abrams.
Yep.
Vasquez has been very passionate, has been very supportive of all your golf and all the things that you do.
Yeah, that's kind of a funny story in the context of when we were talking about getting married. Gosh, it's 1975, 76. I can't remember exactly when we got married, but she goes like, okay, we're either going to get married or we're not. And I go like, well, I play a lot. I said, the deal is that if you put up with the golf and not complain about golf, I said, then this will work. Other than that, it's not going to work. And so she's never played. Surprisingly, she didn't want to. She played a little tennis, and she's a nanny at heart. And, she obviously, went around with the kids in their AJGA and junior life. So she's just focused on the family. She's a world-class shopper.
There you go.
Yeah, but she's from a little town in East Texas, Grand Saline, and she's very proud of that. But at heart, she's just like the rest of us, just trying to make things go and keep things on an even keel. And obviously the kids just adore her because she'll do anything on the planet for them. So it all works.
And the grandkids are great, aren't they?
Yeah, they're a challenge from time to time. They're all different personalities.
Right.
And, they're a hoot. We've got some really athletic kids in there. I'm looking forward to seeing what they turn out to be like.
That's fun, isn't it?
Yes, that's. I feel sorry for people who don't have grandkids because they just will never understand just how deep that vein runs. So it's yeah, we absolutely.
Well, Jody, thank you so much for your time.
Well, glad to visit, and hopefully, people will get the book and read it and enjoy it. It was a real treat to put together, and it's a fun project, and I never get tired of talking about it. So,
oh, that's great.
Anything I can share, more than happy to do it.
Well, that's our we're the beneficiaries of that. So thank you for your time, and appreciate it so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Stay safe.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.